Ladies, listen, because today we're stepping into a different kind of power. Not loud power, not begging, pleasing, or chasing. I'm talking about that silent, feminine strength that makes a man stop, think, and rearrange his whole life just to win you. This speech, 6 silences that make him addicted to you like crazy, isn't about games. It's about self-respect, emotional discipline, and the quiet confidence that Steve Harvey always talks about. You see, sometimes the loudest message is the one you never say out loud. When you move different, when you protect your peace, when you stop explaining yourself, that silence becomes your strongest strategy. It makes a man rethink his actions, value your presence, and realize you're the kind of woman he can't afford to lose. If you've ever felt unappreciated, overlooked, or taken for granted, this is your moment. Because these 6 silences, they will shift the energy, they will make him notice, miss, chase, and respect you without you lifting a finger. So sit back, breathe deep, and let this message remind you of the woman you truly are, rare, powerful, unforgettable. Let's get into it. Silence becomes powerful when you stop explaining yourself to people who already know they're wrong, because that is the moment you finally choose your peace over their ego. There comes a point in life where you realize not everyone deserves access to your heart, your mind, or your energy. Some people don't misunderstand you. They understand you perfectly. They just don't want to be held accountable. And every time you try to explain, justify, or prove your worth, you hand them power they never deserved. The real strength shows up when you stop playing that game. When you choose silence, you choose dignity, you choose emotional maturity, you choose to rise above conversations that go in circles, arguments that drain your soul, and people who only listen to respond, not to understand. Silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's you saying, I know who I am, and I don't need your validation to stand strong. It's the shift that makes a man step back and realize he can't talk you in circles anymore. He can't confuse you, manipulate you, or guilt trip you. He's forced to sit with the truth, his actions, his mistakes, his behavior. Silence exposes what words tried to cover. When you stop explaining, you stop feeding negativity, you stop giving your power away. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects everything he tried to hide from himself. A woman who becomes silent isn't giving up, she's leveling up. She's stepping into a version of herself that values peace over chaos, truth over excuses, and self-worth over temporary emotions. She's no longer bending to make someone else comfortable. She's no longer negotiating her value. She's no longer trying to fix what she didn't break. When you choose silence, you create space. Space for clarity, space for healing, space for a man to realize just how much your presence stabilized his life. Silence turns the spotlight on your absence. It makes him see the difference between someone who talks to be heard and someone who speaks only when it matters. It teaches him that your energy is a privilege, not an entitlement. And when a man finally wakes up to that truth, he understands something deeper. You weren't asking for much. You were asking for respect. You were asking for consistency. You were asking for effort. Silence is the moment where you stop begging for what should have been given freely. It's the moment you decide your heart is too valuable to be explained to someone who refuses to listen. Silence is your elevation. Silence is your strength. Silence is your declaration that you are done entertaining anything beneath the woman you've grown into. A man values you more when your absence teaches him what your presence was worth, because sometimes it takes the quiet for someone to finally hear the truth. There are moments in every woman's life when she pours, gives, supports, uplifts, and shows up with a heart so full it could heal a broken world. But the dangerous part of being that woman is that people begin to confuse your consistency with something they're entitled to. They start believing your love, your care, and your effort will always be there no matter how little they give in return. That's when absence becomes your greatest teacher, because presence was taken for granted. When you step back, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, you create a space that exposes the reality he refused to see. Your silence becomes the reminder of your value. Your distance becomes the lesson he didn't know he needed. The things he ignored suddenly feel heavy. The messages he left unread in his heart now echo louder than ever. He starts noticing what used to feel normal, the warmth in your voice, the way you listened, the way you created peace in places full of chaos. He realizes the comfort he got so used to was never guaranteed. And when that realization hits, it hits deep. Absence doesn't punish him, it reveals you. It shows the strength of a woman who knows she cannot be emotionally drained while trying to fill someone else's life. It shows him that the woman who poured into him had a well inside her. But even the strongest wells run dry when they're taken for granted. When you're no longer available at every moment, when you stop rescuing him from his own patterns, when you stop initiating the conversations that kept the relationship alive, he begins to feel the shift. He finally understands what your presence covered, his inconsistencies, his lack of effort, his emotional laziness. Your presence made him comfortable, but your absence makes him accountable. A man's clarity often comes in the quiet moments when your voice is no longer guiding him, your energy is no longer uplifting him, your encouragement is no longer pushing him. He starts comparing life with you to life without you, and the difference is undeniable. Your absence shows him the emotional stability you brought, the direction you offered, the softness he never knew he needed until it was gone. It teaches him that real love isn't loud, that real loss isn't either. It's the quiet ache in his chest that tells him something sacred slipped through his fingers. Absence is powerful because it allows him to meet the version of himself he became when he didn't appreciate you. He sees the flaws he didn't want to admit. He realizes the habits he refused to change. He confronts the fact that he pushed away the one person who genuinely cared. And that confrontation, it reshapes him because now he knows he can't replace energy like yours. He can't duplicate love like yours. He can't fill the space you once filled with ease and grace. And while he's learning, you're healing. You're discovering your worth isn't tied to his acceptance. You're recognizing your presence was a blessing, not a default. You're understanding that stepping back isn't losing, it's reclaiming. A woman's absence isn't emptiness, it's elevation. It's stepping into your power, protecting your heart, and giving someone the opportunity to grow into the man who can finally appreciate what your presence truly meant. Your quiet distance hits harder than any argument because it forces a man to sit alone with the truth he kept avoiding. Arguments give him something to fight back against, something to deflect, something to blame. But your silence gives him nothing to hide behind. It becomes the mirror he never wanted to look into, the reflection of his own behavior, the consequences of his own choices. When you stop reacting, you take away his excuses. When you stop explaining, you take away his defense. When you pull back your energy, he finally has to face the weight of what he did without the comfort of your presence softening the impact. Quiet distance isn't about punishing him. It's about protecting you. It's you choosing peace over emotional chaos. It's you recognizing that your heart is not a battlefield for someone else's immaturity. It's you understanding that your energy is too precious to be drained by conversations that go nowhere, promises that keep breaking, and cycles that keep repeating. When a woman reaches that point, she doesn't slam doors or shout her pain. She simply withdraws, and that withdrawal becomes the loudest message she could ever send because distance exposes everything words failed to communicate. He starts noticing what was once invisible to him, the good morning text that kept him grounded, the encouragement that kept him motivated, the emotional space you held for him when he was struggling, the warmth in your presence, the softness in your voice, the strength in your support. All the things he dismissed or took lightly become painfully clear when they're suddenly missing. Your quiet becomes the void he can't fill. Your absence becomes the truth he can't escape. Distance also reveals the truth about his intentions. A man who was comfortable taking you for granted now feels threatened by the silence he used to ignore. A man who thought you would always stay now realizes he was never guaranteed your loyalty. A man who was entertained by your tears now becomes terrified of your calm. Quiet distance shows him that you're no longer emotionally accessible, no longer waiting for him to change, no longer carrying the weight of the relationship alone. It shows him that you've stepped into a higher version of yourself, a woman who knows her worth and refuses to bargain with it. And this realization shakes him. It interrupts his patterns. It forces him to confront his carelessness. Your distance becomes the wake-up call he didn't think he'd ever need. It makes him question himself in ways your words never could. Where did I go wrong? Why did she stop trying? How did I let her slip away? Why does it hurt now more than ever? He begins to understand that emotional closeness was something he contributed nothing to, but benefited everything from. He begins to understand that love cannot survive on autopilot. He begins to understand that your effort was never guaranteed. It was earned, and he stopped earning it. Quiet distance also strengthens you. It gives you space to see clearly. It gives you time to breathe without being suffocated by emotional confusion. It gives you the clarity to see who he really is, not who you hoped he would become. It allows you to detach from the fantasy and face the reality. You begin to understand that love isn't supposed to feel like proving yourself. It isn't supposed to feel like convincing someone of your worth. It isn't supposed to feel like doing the emotional work for two. Your distance becomes the place where you reclaim your strength and rebuild your standards. You start choosing yourself the way you once chose him. You start realizing that your softness is a gift, your loyalty is rare, and your presence is powerful. And when a woman learns her power, she doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she doesn't explain. She simply acts with quiet confidence, knowing that the right man will understand her value without her having to remind him. Quiet distance is your reset. It's your transformation. It's your awakening. It's the moment he realizes you were the peace he couldn't recognize, the love he didn't honor, the blessing he mishandled. And the moment you pull back, everything he ignored becomes everything he wants back. When you stop chasing, you give him space to recognize what he's losing, because sometimes your pursuit becomes the very thing that blinds him to your value. When you're always reaching out first, always checking in, always holding the relationship together with both hands, he gets used to being carried. He starts to believe the effort is optional, that showing up is a choice he can make whenever he feels like it. Your consistency becomes his comfort zone, and your effort becomes his excuse to do less. But the moment you stop running behind someone who's walking away, everything changes. Your pause becomes the shift that forces him to look around and realize you're no longer there to close the distance he created. When you stop chasing, you stop feeding his ego and start feeding your own self-worth. You step back into your power. You let the relationship breathe. And in that space, he starts to feel the emptiness that your presence used to fill so effortlessly. The calls don't come as quickly. The messages don't light up his phone like they used to. The attention he once received without earning now feels like a privilege he lost. And that discomfort becomes his awakening. A man who thought you would always be there begins to panic when the pattern shifts. He starts replaying moments, reevaluating his choices, and finally seeing the effort you poured into him. Stopping the chase doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped carrying the whole relationship on your back. It means you're done trying to convince someone to meet you halfway. It means you value your heart too much to keep pouring into someone who's not pouring back. And that energy shift speaks louder than any argument ever could. He feels it in his routine. He feels it in his silence. He feels it in the space where your love used to sit like a steady heartbeat in his life. When you stop chasing, you also give yourself the gift of clarity. You start seeing who he really is without the fog of your own effort clouding the truth. You begin to understand whether he truly cares or whether he was just comfortable with your pursuit. You discover whether he steps up when the pressure is no longer on you, or whether he lets the distance grow without lifting a finger. His reaction to your absence reveals everything you couldn't see when you were the one closing the gap. And if he truly values you, he'll start moving. He'll start trying. He'll start showing the kind of effort he should have given from the beginning. Not because you begged, not because you pushed, but because he recognizes your worth on his own. And if he doesn't step up, then the space you created becomes your protection. It becomes the doorway to something healthier, deeper, and more deserving of the love you carry. When a woman stops chasing, she stops losing herself. She stops shrinking. She stops settling. She stands tall in her truth, knowing the right man will meet her where she stands without needing to be pursued. Silence becomes powerful when you stop explaining yourself to people who already know they're wrong, because that is the moment you rise into a version of yourself that no longer seeks understanding from those who benefit from misunderstanding you. There's a quiet strength in choosing not to argue, not to defend, not to break yourself down trying to make someone see what they've already decided to ignore. Some people don't misinterpret you. They deliberately minimize your feelings so they don't have to face their own behavior. And every time you try to explain, every time you try to justify, you hand them power over your peace. But when you choose silence, you take that power back. Silence isn't surrender. Silence is elevation. It's the moment you step outside the emotional tug of war and say, I no longer play games that hurt my spirit. Your silence shows you've matured past the point of needing validation from anyone who refuses to give you respect. You're not shutting down, you're leveling up. You're understanding that true confidence doesn't need to prove itself. True clarity doesn't need to shout. True self-worth doesn't need an audience. Silence becomes the space where you reconnect with yourself, where you breathe again, where you remember who you were before someone tried to make you question your value. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop wasting energy on conversations that go nowhere. You stop revisiting the same wounds. You stop trying to convince someone to care. Instead, your silence forces them to face the reality they've been avoiding. Without your words to twist or your emotions to blame, he has no shield. He can't deflect. He can't manipulate. He can't redirect. A woman who moves in silence shows she's done talking and ready for results, because there comes a moment when your spirit gets tired of repeating the same truth to someone who never intended to listen. Silence becomes your shift, your transition, your elevation into a version of yourself that refuses to waste breath on explanations that fall on deaf ears. When you stop announcing your next move, you stop giving people the chance to interfere with it. You stop giving them space to doubt you, distract you, or discourage you. You start walking with a quiet confidence that says, watch me, without ever having to say a word. Moving in silence isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. You're clear on what you deserve. You're clear on what you will no longer tolerate. You're clear on where your energy is going and who no longer gets access to it. When you step into that quiet power, the world around you changes. People who once tested your patience suddenly feel your distance. People who once underestimated you begin to wonder how you grew so strong so fast. And the man who once thought you'd always be available begins to realize he doesn't know your next step, and that uncertainty shifts everything. Silence is your boundary. Silence is your strength. Silence is your way of saying, if you want to be in my life, you're going to have to show up for real, because words are easy, promises are cheap, but silence requires action. It demands effort. It forces people to meet you where you stand or fall away because they can't rise to your level. When you move in silence, you start protecting your heart in ways you didn't before. You stop oversharing. You stop giving people the blueprint to your healing. You stop seeking approval for decisions that were never theirs to influence. You start trusting yourself, your intuition, your resilience, your vision. You become the kind of woman who doesn't need to announce her growth. She becomes her growth. She becomes the calm in her own storm, the anchor in her own journey, the leader of her own story, and the man watching you from a distance feels that shift more deeply than any words could express. He feels the loss of your emotional availability. He feels the quiet you once filled with love, effort, and attention. He feels the weight of your absence in spaces where your presence used to soften his world. He realizes that a woman who moves in silence is a woman who's no longer waiting for him to catch up. She's no longer hoping he'll change. She's no longer holding space for potential. She's moving forward, and if he wants to be part of that journey, he'll have to prove it through consistent action, not empty promises. A woman in her silent season is dangerous, not because she's angry, but because she's awakened. She's focused, she's intentional. She's done explaining, done fixing, done chasing, done begging for the bare minimum. She's aligned with her purpose, her peace, and her power, and nothing speaks louder than that quiet transformation. Your silence is not punishment. It's a reminder that your peace comes first, because there is a power in knowing that you no longer have to bend, beg, or justify your worth to anyone. So many women make the mistake of thinking that staying loud, explaining, or defending themselves will make someone value them more, but the truth is the opposite. When you speak too much to fix a situation or to convince someone of your value, you give away pieces of your energy that should belong only to you. Silence, on the other hand, preserves that energy. Silence protects your heart. Silence reminds both you and him that your peace is not negotiable. When a woman chooses silence, she steps into a higher level of emotional intelligence. She understands that arguing or over-explaining doesn't teach respect. It drains her soul. She knows that trying to change someone's mind is futile when their perception has already been set. Silence becomes her tool, her shield, her declaration that she will not compromise her calm for someone else's comfort. It's a way of saying, without words, I value myself enough to step back, to create space, to honor my own emotional well-being. Silence also becomes a mirror for the other person. It forces him to confront his actions without the distraction of your reactions. He can no longer hide behind your explanations, your reassurances, or your emotional labor. When your voice isn't there to soften the truth, he sees clearly what he's done and what he's lost. He starts to feel the weight of your absence, and that weight is far more impactful than anything you could have said. Silence communicates what words often fail to deliver. It shows that you are not available to tolerate disrespect, inconsistency, or indifference. Choosing silence is also a gift to yourself. It gives you clarity. It allows you to step back and see the situation with perspective, to evaluate whether the person deserves your presence, your love, your energy. It reminds you that your happiness doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition of your value. When you honor your peace, you create boundaries that protect your heart from repeated pain. You demonstrate self-respect in its purest form. And while you maintain that silence, life shifts around you. People notice the change in your energy. A man who once took your presence for granted begins to feel the absence that speaks louder than any conversation ever could. He begins to recognize the weight of the moments he failed to appreciate. Your silence forces him to confront the reality that your peace is not a game, your love is not negotiable, and your presence is a privilege. In that quiet, the truth becomes undeniable. A woman who values her peace above all else is unstoppable, unshakable, and impossible to ignore. The day you stop reacting is the day he realizes he never controlled the situation. You did, because there is a power and restraint that words and actions often fail to show. When a woman constantly reacts to every slight, every misunderstanding, every careless word, she hands over her emotional authority to someone else. She gives them the ability to dictate her mood, her peace, and her energy. But the moment you stop reacting, the dynamic changes completely. You are no longer a participant in the chaos they create. You are the calm observer who refuses to be manipulated by drama or emotional games. Your stillness becomes the statement, your silence becomes the signal, and your confidence becomes the undeniable truth. Stopping your reactions doesn't mean you no longer care. It doesn't mean you no longer notice or feel. It means you are wise enough to understand that your peace is far more valuable than proving a point or defending yourself to someone who refuses to see. Every reaction you held back teaches him more than any argument ever could. It teaches him that you are no longer willing to bend, to justify, or to engage in cycles that diminish your worth. He starts noticing the changes he can't control, the calm that replaces your previous turbulence, and the composure that speaks volumes without a single word. When a woman stops reacting, she sets the rules without announcing them. She establishes boundaries that are unshakable because they are reinforced by action, not argument. A man begins to realize that his attempts to provoke, manipulate, or sway you have no effect anymore. That control he thought he had was an illusion. And when he understands that your emotional state is untouchable by his behavior, he begins to see the depth of your strength, the power of your restraint, and the value of your presence. Your non-reaction also gives you clarity. It creates the space to see the truth without the cloud of anger, frustration, or hurt influencing your judgment. You can observe his intentions, his actions, and his character with fresh eyes. You see who is willing to rise to the level of your standards and who cannot. You begin to recognize patterns, uncover truths, and decide what aligns with your worth and what does not. Stopping your reactions is an act of self-respect, an act of wisdom, and an act of emotional mastery. And the effect is undeniable. He begins to chase, to reflect, to reevaluate his actions and decisions. The silence in your non-reaction becomes a mirror he cannot ignore, showing him the woman he tried to control, dismiss, or misunderstand in her truest, strongest form. Your power is revealed not through loud proclamations, but through the steady, unwavering presence of a woman who has reclaimed her energy, her authority, and her peace. Stopping your reactions is not giving up, it's stepping into a level of confidence, clarity, and strength that changes the entire dynamic, proving that control was never his to hold. It was always yours. A strong woman lets her silence speak the truth a man refuses to hear out loud, because sometimes words aren't enough to make someone understand the value of what they have. There comes a moment when repeating yourself, explaining your feelings, and trying to justify your worth only diminishes your energy and gives him a false sense of control. Silence, on the other hand, is not weakness. It's the loudest language of strength, the most powerful form of communication, and the clearest reflection of self-respect. When you stop trying to convince him, stop defending yourself, and stop explaining, you allow reality to speak for itself. Your absence from the conversation, your pause from the constant effort, and your decision to guard your peace become louder than any argument ever could. A woman who masters silence understands that people often refuse to hear the truth because it challenges their ego, their habits, or their comfort. They would rather ignore, justify, or deflect than confront the reality of their actions, and no amount of talking, reasoning, or pleading will change that. Silence, however, removes the opportunity for distraction. It forces him to confront his own behavior, his own choices, and his own mistakes without the buffer of your explanations. In that space, he begins to see what he took for granted, what he neglected, and what he risked losing. Your silence becomes the teacher he didn't know he needed. When you remain quiet, you reclaim your power. You stop participating in the cycles of misunderstanding and disappointment that drain your spirit. You stop giving away your emotional energy to someone who refuses to value it. Your quiet presence becomes a statement. I am enough, I am complete, and I will not diminish myself to make you comfortable. And in that silence, the truth of your worth becomes undeniable. He starts noticing the consistency, the patience, the love, and the care that were always present, and he realizes that none of it was automatic. It was a gift, and he failed to appreciate it fully. Silence also protects your heart. By speaking less, you stop allowing someone else to manipulate your emotions or control your reactions. You create a space where your thoughts, feelings, and energy are safe from being distorted or misused. You stop justifying your decisions, your boundaries, and your presence, and you begin to act from a place of strength rather than reaction. A man who witnesses this quiet strength begins to understand that emotional availability is not a given, it is earned. He begins to see the depth of your patience, the extent of your loyalty, and the magnitude of your love, and he realizes that what he once ignored cannot be replaced easily. A woman who lets her silence speak also teaches self-respect through example. She demonstrates that love without respect is unsustainable, that effort without reciprocation is wasted, and that presence without appreciation has limits. Her quietness is a reflection of her standards, her dignity, and her understanding of her own worth. It is the ultimate message that she will not compromise herself for anyone's convenience. And in that silence, transformation occurs. He begins to chase what he once took for granted. He begins to reflect on his mistakes. He begins to understand that your love, attention, and presence were not obligations, they were privileges. Your silence forces him to confront the reality that he cannot replace what he ignored, cannot recreate what he lost, and cannot take lightly the woman who quietly held everything together while he was blind to her value. The strength of a woman who lets her silence speak lies not in her absence of words, but in the undeniable power of her presence. Her calm, her restraint, and her quiet confidence reveal the truth in a way that no argument ever could. It shows him the depth of her heart, the weight of her love, and the standard of respect she requires. And the realization hits him harder than any speech. She was never just present for his convenience. She was a force, a gift, and a truth he cannot ignore. Ladies, listen closely, because what you've just heard isn't just about relationships. It's about power, respect, and knowing your worth. These 6 silences aren't games. They're lessons in self-love, boundaries, and the kind of magnetic energy that makes a man chase what he cannot ignore. When you step into your quiet strength, when you stop explaining, stop chasing, and stop lowering yourself for anyone who doesn't value you, you send a message that is louder than words ever could. You are telling the world and him that your heart is sacred, your peace is priceless, and your presence is a privilege, not a given. Remember, a woman who moves with intention, who protects her energy, and who honors herself without apology becomes irresistible. Silence is your weapon, your shield, and your spotlight. It makes him see what he once overlooked and makes him crave what he can't take for granted. So go forward with courage, walk in your worth, and let your quiet confidence do the talking. The moment you honor yourself, you change the game entirely. Stay powerful, stay patient, and never forget, the strongest love a man will ever chase is the love that knows its own value.